So if you aren't in the place right now in your marriage that the communication is healthy and that you're not able to, then start asking yourself this question. Because really, a healthy marriage takes two, and it starts with you.
So I heard a question a few weeks ago, and it's been like playing around in my head a little bit, and it keeps coming up time here and there. It's a question that I've never asked myself. It's a question I have never been asked, and I can't recall anybody ever asked, like hearing somebody else ask this question. So the question is around marriage, and the question is, what are you pretending is not a problem in your marriage?
Wow. That's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
It would be such an interesting question also for you to ask yourself, and then for your spouse to ask themselves also.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would say most likely the answers could be different, but once it was said out loud, I bet both parties would acknowledge that, yes, that is a problem.
Yes. And why are we afraid to say it's a problem? Why are we afraid to say us not having date nights is a problem?
Mm-hmm.
Or us not talking about our finances is a problem?
Yeah, us not discussing sex is a problem. Like just checking the box and doing it, but not actually having intimate conversations about it. Mm-hmm. One of the first thing that did come to mind, that it's like in my mind, I want to say it's not a problem, but if we're really going to get honest, the fact that we watch television in bed every single night. Because I do feel that television, if it wasn't there, we probably would have more intimacy in the bedroom than what we do. But it's just a habit of ours that when we go to bed, we turn on the television, we each fall to sleep to it. So it's not, the sleep timer's on, and it doesn't hinder our sleep. So I don't see that as a problem.
Right.
But if I'm going to be super honest, like the television takes our attention away from what could be happening in the bedroom more often. So yeah, that's probably a problem.
I thought it was such a great question, because it's the little things that we just chalk up to being a stage of life, or a habit, a comfort thing, having the TV on in bed. It doesn't become a problem until it's been happening for years. And then a lot of times we don't even identify that as the problem. The problem now tends to be the person. He doesn't speak to me. He doesn't look at me. She doesn't talk to me. You know, all the different things it could be, that all the things we could point fingers at. She nags me. He doesn't hear me. Well, what if we asked that question earlier on in our marriage? What if we saw roadblocks to intimacy? And when we talk about intimacy in a marriage, we aren't talking about just sexual intimacy, even though that is a big component of it, but like relational intimacy, financial intimacy, recreational intimacy, you know, all those components, emotionally. Non-sexual touch is so important. And I think we did a podcast episode on that, or at least we mentioned the importance of
we talked about it during our
touch.
love language podcast, that physical touch we're not talking just about sexual touch. We're talking about just physical touch, holding hands, rubbing somebody's back.
Yeah. So what those roadblocks to intimacy, a problem is anything, and I started thinking about, like, how would I define a problem? I would define a problem as anything that begins to hinder intimacy between you and your spouse. And it really opened up my initial thought of, well, nothing. I'm not pretending, to like, wow, this could be a lot of different topics. Like you said, they might not even be the same ones. But there's a fear, I think, around calling it a problem.
Yes.
Because then, like that, saying you have a problem, it feels like, oh no, it's going to take all this effort to fix it, and
or we're on the road to destruction because of it. You know, if you identify a problem, well, then the problem that's negative. So then you just go down that negative road with your mind thought process.
Yes. And you can even get into the finger pointing again when you start thinking about a problem, like you did this or you did that or didn't do this, and now we're in this situation where it could have been avoided if we had looked at those things earlier on in our marriage.
This is a really interesting topic. And we don't check in with I say we, I'm saying as a population.
Right.
Like really check in with our marriage. Most of the time with most couples, they start checking in because people are checked out. You know, that's the time that we start really trying to invest in paying attention to each other, finding out what's going on, finding any problems that haven't been identified. It's after the marriage is heading down a really hard road. What if we did that on a regular basis?
Yes.
We didn't wait until we had to rebuild something that had been crushed, that we could literally just do normal check-ins. I'm literally thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I'm going to ask Ben this question. And I have to be prepared to listen to his answer.
Yes.
I think that's where we have a hard time too. Because it's really easy for me to sit here and I can make a laundry list of the things that something that Ben does that gets on my nerves. He doesn't like put his shoes away or like, whatever. Like, but I don't ask him to make a laundry list for me. Like it's just, I kind of focus on those things. So this is really one of those things of saying I'm opening some honest conversation and I'm prepared to listen to whatever is said. Because ultimately what comes out of that question is the collective good together. It's not trying to slam one person or another. It's collectively trying to get to a better place.
Understanding problem doesn't mean the end. It's just an issue. It's a situation.
And the issue isn't always what we think it is. So I'm going to use another example of something we addressed early on in our marriage. Okay, so my husband would leave. He would jump in the shower and he would leave his underpants on the floor. Every day. Like every single day. And so there became a point where I decided I was going to stop picking them up and we'll see how many pairs of underpants can be collected on the floor. The problem was that I was feeling that he didn't value me because he had an expectation that I was going to pick up his underpants for him, which meant he thought very little of me, that I was his underpants picker-upper.
Yeah.
And so it hurt me. His underpants on the floor hurt me. It was a personal thing against me. When really, he just spent his life that his mother picked up his underpants every day. Like that was literally the way that he went about his life. So he didn't think a thing of it, including he did not think little of me and have he didn't even have an expectation that I was going to pick it up. He just didn't think about it,
Yeah.
But instead, it hurt me because I felt like he was devaluing me as his wife. And so that problem of the underwear on the floor was something more even in me. Like it took life in something that we had totally different perspectives on it.
Isn't that true in almost everything that we confront, before we talk about it, we create a story around it and assign our spouse's intention behind why they do what they do. Why they did that, we assign that intention behind it before having a conversation. That's such a dangerous thing. That's a really dangerous thing, but it just is something we naturally do.
Yeah, it ruins marriages because people take it on, a behavior that a spouse has, they take it on as it's personally against them, when many times there are habits that have nothing to do with them.
Right.
And much worse than just even underwear on the floor. I mean, we can get into, let's go all the way down like a porn addiction, for example, which is, of course that feels, as a spouse, you feel like they don't love you, they don't think you're attractive, they don't value you. This becomes this is against you, when truly what's going on is a problem that they have that's with them. And it has nothing to do with you.
When you're newlyweds or engaged and you have all these expectations of what life will be like together, and most of them are rosy and happy, and then just life happens. Doing life with another person happens. And you have two different people coming together, or disagreements, disappointments, failed expectations, or unmet expectations start to play a role in it, but we don't address them. We don't say this is a problem in our marriage. It's something we just shove down and move forward on because we don't have time to address it, or we don't have the energy to address it, or we're afraid to address it. And then, like you said, it's going to grow, and then it's going to become a problem.
Yeah, how often do we think to ourselves, I'm just going to get over it? And what happens is we tuck it away. Like, we don't let it, it's not gone. We don't let it go. Yes. We're just tucking it. And then it shows its ugly head and more power when an offense happens again. And so I really love this question. I feel like this could be a great discussion for Ben and I to really talk about things that maybe even don't seem like a big deal. But if we really look at the way that it is changing our schedule or our quality of time together, the quality of our conversations, that it is a big deal.
Yeah, it is. It's a big deal for your relationship, and then your relationship is going to influence the other relationships in your life. Your work, your children, your other family members. And if we're not careful, I think what can happen is we get to this point where you have expectations with the marriage and what it's going to be like to have a family of your own, because you get to create it, right? Like, you get to create what your family looks like. And then things happen, but we don't really address them. You either commit to working on it and moving forward, or it's like you go back to a time where you had peace and joy and happiness in life. And too often we associate that before that marriage relationship. And so that can really put you in a bad path.
Really what you're challenging here with that question is to start getting honest with the way that we are connecting with each other. And so if we're honest with ourselves and our spouse, then it could be just the beginning any day. We have to deal with anything in the past, but if we can be honest, right here in this moment, then it can be a fresh start for anything that feels not right or is making us unhappy. I love that question because I'm thinking to myself, okay, great question. So this is a question Ben and I can sit down and talk about. I need to be open to whatever he says. I would hope the same for him. And then we get to have, like, from that question, we get to step off and change it.
Yes.
And that's exciting. I mean, a lot of fun can come from that.
Yeah. I mean, the goal of it would be to increase intimacy.
Yeah.
And have a really great life together.
So if you're thinking to yourself, okay, what are those things? I think some of the things that we don't think about right now become so honest. Like, immediately the other thing I thought about is how much our phones are in our hands.
Oh, yes.
Like that.
Yes.
Absolutely. I can tell you right now that is a problem. It prevents us from spending time together when those phones are always in our hands. I'm even going to say for work purposes. I'm not just saying scrolling social media. I mean, social media is a problem in its own. We know how addicted our minds get to scrolling. It's a goal to keep us scrolling. That's what they want. But even the fact that we are 24/7, like, available. So immediately, phones is one thing that would be, nobody would think of that as this is a major problem in our marriage. I mean, I can't say that. There are people that feel it's a major problem in marriage, but it's become so common to have a phone in our hand that we're not addressing it immediately as this is a problem. But it prevents intimacy in my household, and we're pretty connected people. But if we're not intentional about putting it away, there's the connection. We're not connecting with each other.
Yeah. I think that's an issue across the board with relationships, is the devices in front of us. It is unfortunate how much time we look at a device instead of a face.
So I think maybe that's one of the things that has made our friendship super strong, because our friendship has grown while we're out running. There's no device in front of our face when we're running.
Yeah.
It is
true.
Authentic conversation. And as we got closer, it got more real and more raw. And that is how we've been able to grow our relationship. There's not a boundary of that between us, which to me has made a difference of maybe some other relationships in my life.
That is true, because very rarely are we on our phones when we're together.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
It is interesting.
Connection. I think another thing is just not even being aware of how little time we're actually connecting with our spouses. We may be roommates, but we're not building that intimacy as a couple. How often are we just passing in the hall? Are we, I was going to say systematic, but like habitual with our conversation? Good morning, how are you? Good morning, how are you? Like, it's just the cadence of life, and we're not really exploring to know that person anymore. We all change as we get older and go through different experiences in life. And if we're not striving to know that person at that stage of life, if we're assuming that person is the person that we married or the person that we dated, then we're really doing an injustice to that person and how they've grown. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, so
complacency in spending time together, taking a walk and talk. That's a beautiful time together where you're just walking. You don't even have to be holding hands, but it would be nice to. And just having conversation, moving your body, being outside.
So a couple weeks ago, we were out and we had somebody we know came by and they said, I love that you guys do date nights, because date nights is super important to me.
Yes.
Quality time is my love language. So that's why I make sure it happens so that my tank will be filled. And I'll tell you that Ben does not plan them. And if I waited for him to plan them, I would be disappointed. Okay. So I could, we talked about like sabotaging ourselves. I could have an expectation that I want I want Ben to plan date nights for me. Wouldn't that be so wonderful and romantic? I'm going to wait for him to do it. Well, I would be sabotaging myself for that. When just as much, I can plan a date night. We can go out, we connect, we're together, and it's wonderful. So for me to expect that is for me to set myself up for disappointment. But anyways, Amy come up and she goes, I love that you guys do date nights. And I was like, well, I need date nights. Like, it's not an option for me. And so then we happened to be able to get one like the week later. And she was there again. And she was like, I love that you guys do date nights. If Ben and I can get away together, like we do it. Yeah. And it has been, that's so good for us. That's when we truly connect. We still come home and we keep talking. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't stop. It's not all of a sudden we pull in the driveway and then we're back. It's the avenue for us to be able to talk. And it makes me super sad when couples, somebody'd say we go out on our anniversary every year. I'd be like, oh my gosh, because being at home, it's harder to be intentional. Like, you have to be really intentional beyond the chaos of the sports practices and the homework and the cooking of the meals and the cleaning and the laundry. So you get away from the home, then you don't have all those distractions.
I think another area where we don't identify a problem in a marriage, but it usually becomes one, are hobbies.
Yes.
The amount of time that one spouse's hobbies takes away from the family. I think there's a fine line there, because you do need to have outlets, you do need to have things you're interested in, you do need to do those things, but trying to find that good balance or a healthy relationship with that hobby can be difficult for some people.
So my feeling about hobbies, I think hobbies are wonderful and important. If it is your outlet to escape and you use it as an escape route, that's a problem. That's a problem to be identified. And it's not about the hobby, it's about the need to escape that needs to be addressed. So again, it's almost like it's not about the underwear, it's about the emotion. So really looking into that situation. So that is one when I think it's a problem. And also if the spouse feels in competition with the hobby, because easily a person can have a hobby and the spouse doesn't feel like it's competition.
And you need to have hobbies together. Even if you're incredibly different people, find something the two of you enjoy doing together and then do that together. You can still have your own individual hobbies and interests, but find something that you do together and that you enjoy.
And I feel like there's not even a time that's too late. And I'm not saying I'm not saying if there are underlying issues in the marriage that need to be dealt with, I'm not getting into that kind of damage. But let's say you're in a situation where you've been married for 20 years and you're sending your youngest off to college and you think to yourself, I don't know this person anymore. Therefore, it's too late. I don't believe that.
Or we've grown too far apart.
I believe then it's time to really be like, how do I get to know this person?
Yeah.
How can we find some things we enjoy to do together? How can we go back and remember the things that I fell in love with in the first place? Because I believe that God plays an integral part into our marriage, and he can heal a whole lot of time of distance that grew apart, but that takes us being intentional about making those connections and being like, okay, how can we make this happen? And I do believe that even people that feel like they can grow apart can come back together and have the most amazing, fun, beautiful, adventurous marriage for the rest of the time that they both live. If you're intentional.
You're right. You have to be intentional with it. Otherwise, you're just going to put a little bit of effort to it, and it's not going to matter. Because you have drifted so far apart. You have grown so far apart. But the problem is not just that you've grown apart, it's that bitterness and resentment and anger has grown up in there. All those problems that you never talked about have now sprouted.
Took life.
Took life, yeah. And then it does seem insurmountable at that point if you're not being intentional, if you're not committed to making it better.
I feel the same about work.
I was gonna say work can definitely be an outlet,
and it can be an escape, and it can also be the spouse can feel in competition with the job, and that is not, in my opinion, that is not what you want for your marriage. No. Like a job is a tool to a person's gifts and creativity are used through that tool to help the family thrive and to give them money, which is also a tool to be able to live. Like it all, but it's not supposed to be in competition with your relationships in your life. Yes. And your connection and your intimacy.
One thing I wanted to say about work that I've just noticed, this isn't like a scientific study or anything, it's just something I've noticed, that very high achievers in the corporate world will respond to messages on LinkedIn or post on LinkedIn, because you can see who looks at different posts during holiday times. And that made me sad, because these are people that travel often. They're gone from their families a lot. They're very high achievers at work. And when they have an opportunity to be with their family, they're jumping on LinkedIn. And I thought, we need to talk about that a little bit, because one, you're escaping, and two, for some reason, this person doesn't feel like they have a place, possibly, in the family role. And that could be a problem. If one spouse is dominating all of the roles in the family,
and it may be because they've been basically running that family because the other spouse is not present.
Yes. How do you incorporate that spouse who is not in the day-to-day school drop-offs, doing homework, after-school activities, when they do have an opportunity to be there? You being intentional about finding ways to link them in or to bring them back into that family unit for those special events. Now, there could be some resentment around that as well that, that you just have to overcome and say, this is going to be for the betterment of my marriage and for my family, and I'm going to put my hurt feelings or pride or anger or whatever aside. Or I want all the attention because I want all the credit for making this happen, because I've had to make it happen for big holidays where it takes a lot of coordination. But the number of people that would look at a post on LinkedIn during a holiday time, and I did that because I had a feeling after listening to people talk, this was pre-COVID, but listening to people talk about their holiday time and how they would try to just get away from in-laws, or if the kids were getting on their nerves because they weren't around the kids that often, I thought, I'm going to see if engagement happens more on certain holidays. And it does.
Oh, that's so interesting. So what are the things that are not okay, but we're not saying it?
I think what threw me off was the pretending.
Yes.
Because I was like, I don't pretend, like, I don't feel like I'm pretending. But when I got to the heart of it, I wasn't addressing. I wasn't talking about. And I think everybody does that. Like, everybody would say, yes, there is something that I'm just not going to bring up because it's not worth it. It's not worth the argument.
It's not worth a fight.
It's not worth a fight. It's not that big of a deal.
Yet every time I walk in the room and see it, like, I feel angry or I roll my eyes or I lose respect. But it's not that big of a deal. Like, I'm just not going to, it's not worth the fight.
Yeah. I remember one time McKenna was a baby and there was rice cereal on the counter and I hadn't cleaned it up. And that stuff gets like concrete.
Cement.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Ken walked in And he was like, can you not clean this up? I was like, mm-mm. I was so tired. Like, I looked at it and I was like, I just did not think I had the energy to do it. I was exhausted. You know, it's those types of little things that then become a problem, because now in my mind, I'm like, if I don't have the counters wiped off, he's going to be mad, because now that's an expectation that he has. And he probably thought I was being ridiculous saying, no, I can't wipe that up. It's so funny. Like, you don't realize how exhausted you are after a baby sometimes. That was something we never talked about. But if we had known this question, talked about it earlier, then, oh, he's coming in, let me pick up real quick, would
have changed. If you would have just had the conversation about how exhausted you were, and how the thought of scraping that rice cereal was just one more thing that you couldn't do. And if you could just do it for me, please.
Yeah.
And then he would have grabbed a rag and got it off. And then how would that have changed reactions going forward? Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yes. No, you're absolutely right.
But it's those little tiny things that then sprout up. And we create stories around what somebody else is thinking. Like, he was probably like, man, she's lazy. You know, she can't even wipe that up off the counter.
Or does she not even see that there? Like,
yeah.
And we keep scorecards. Mm-hmm. So these little problems, also the things are, what's a problem that we pretend. While we're pretending, we've got, a lot of us keep these scorecards going in our head. Mm-hmm. And that's how it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, instead of just having conversations about it. Well, I'm definitely going to ask Ben. I think that, and I'm also going to ask him with an open heart. So no matter what he says, I'm ready to really take it in, because ultimately I want to have a fantastic marriage. Mm-hmm. And I don't want either one of us to have a scorecard.
Yeah.
Or even create voices in our head. And I know him and I both have it. Mm-hmm. So, but if we're not talking about it, then again, they just take life of their own.
So when you bring this up to your spouse, and I think it's great to have that conversation. Here are 2 little tips to help move the conversation along, but not feel like not make somebody feel defensive, like you're assigning blame or something. And it also helps you not to create that story in your head about what they mean. So when your spouse says, this is what I think is a problem, you can say, tell me more about that. After they tell you, tell me more about that. Or, what exactly do you mean by that? Because in those 2, you're inviting them to share more about what they mean, instead of, that's not how it is. That's not what I'm like. But, which is a lot of times our initial response, like, you think that is a problem? No. But when you say, tell me more about that, or what do you mean by that? You're inviting them to share their heart more deeply, and for you to get clarity around what they mean, so that you're not creating that story in your head.
Yeah, I think it's always good to go into these conversations too, and in our mind, say, before we start it, say, I'm going to listen to everything that's said and not try to prove someone wrong.
Oh, yes.
And I got that from our coach, Jeffrey Combs. Like, listen to what I say and don't try to prove me wrong. Mm-hmm. And so if you're listening to someone and they're telling you this is how they feel, and you're not going to allow yourself to jump in to try to prove them wrong, you really are hearing them on a different level. Yes. You can process it once you're away from the situation and think, I don't know, if maybe there isn't truth there. You could process that later. But in that situation, truly listen to what they have to say and turn off your instinct of wanting to be able to prove someone wrong.
Yeah. And if your spouse is not open to having this conversation right now, don't push it. You may think, that's just a simple question that's really healthy to ask. But they may feel guilty. They may feel inadequate. They may feel like you're trying to pin something on them. So respect that as well.
I think this is actually a question we even can just ask ourselves.
Yes,
I mean, I think it's
absolutely.
a great question to have a conversation with your spouse, but I could ask myself this question and have some serious aha moments. So if you aren't in the place right now in your marriage that the communication is healthy and that you're not able to, then start asking yourself this question. Because really, a healthy marriage takes two and it starts with you. So if you aren't in the place right now in your marriage that the communication is healthy and that you're not able to, then start asking yourself this question. Because really, a healthy marriage takes two and it starts with you. So what is a problem? What is going on with me that's a problem? What is activities that I do as a problem? What avoidance techniques do I have that's a problem? You know, that's when things start changing with you.
So we hope this question enriches your marriage, brings some fun communication to some maybe much needed topics. If you would like to learn more about what Nicole and I do, visit www.liveyourdesign.life. And very soon on the website, we'll be putting some information about a marriage retreat we will be hosting in August. If you can join us, we would love to have you. Bye.